it's time we clarified a few things on sexual harassment in fashion. This is a typical set for a fashion shoot. This is the shooting area for the photographer, this is the waiting area for the staff, but there's something missing, a private changing area for the model. Is it sexual harassment? I'm Cleo Abram. I work at Vox Media and I'm also a model. I'm going to talk to Sara Ziff, the founder of the Model Alliance, a nonprofit that works on labor protections for models.
If you're showing up on that day and someone says, oh, by the way, can we do this topless? No, that is harassment.
No space to change, sexual innuendo, comments about your body, pressure to pose nude, touching you or your clothes without asking. If someone did any of these things in an office, it would clearly be sexual harassment. But on set, the lines get very blurry. Around 40% of all women across industries endure sexual harassment in the workplace, according to a recent study by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. But a study conducted by the Model Alliance found that over 80% of models experience sexual harassment on the job. That's wild. It's more than double the national average.
I started working as a model when I was 14 at Fashion Week. We're often made to strip down in front of whoever is backstage. When everyone has a camera, it doesn't feel so good to feel exposed in that way.
The reality is that we're paid for the use of our bodies, which requires people to be able to talk about them, evaluate them, and yes, maybe sometimes touch them on the job. But just because the lines are more difficult to draw doesn't mean it's any more okay to cross them. The root of the problem is the structure of modeling itself. The Model Alliance found that most models begin working before they turn 16, but the vast majority of young women under the age of 18 are not supervised by a parent or guardian while they're on the job. The legal side of modeling adds another layer.
When we looked at the laws on the books, we found because the modeling industry generally insists in New York that models are independent contractors, not employees, under federal and New York state law, independent contractors lack protection against sexual harassment in the workplace.
In the 1970s, modeling agencies began changing their corporate structure from licensed theatrical employment agencies to management companies that advise models, which are much less tightly regulated. The new structure stripped models of their legal protections. Because models are now categorized as independent contractors, they're left out of anti-discrimination rules that apply to employees.
One thing that I find interesting is that actors under the law, whether or not they're in a union, are considered employees.
They do get the protections that those employment laws guarantee them.
Right.
It might seem obvious that modeling agencies are more than management companies. After all, they make money by booking models to clients like magazines and fashion brands and taking a cut of their earnings. But in New York, agencies use a specific loophole in state law called the incidental booking exception. Basically, agencies are saying that bookings are just incidental to the agency's function in advising the model.
I'm not quite sure what that advice is. I suppose they advise us on how to walk.
By calling themselves management companies and using the incidental booking exception, agencies are able to avoid the laws that would hold them accountable for a model being sexually harassed or assaulted on the job. This is my modeling contract. It says that my agency will advise and counsel me in any and all matters regarding publicity and the public relations and general practices of modeling. Because they frame it that way, they aren't liable for harassment, assault, or discrimination at any shoot or show they book me for. What does that look like when an agency shirks that responsibility?
If you have known predators in the industry and you have agents or managers who are essentially supplying those predatory people with young talent, it's pretty sinister. It's not that they aren't liable, but they would argue that they're not liable. And I think that that deserves a closer look by the government. Sometimes people will say, why are you complaining about this industry? This is an industry that relies largely on kids, 14, 15, 16-year-olds who are being put in pretty adult situations, and in some cases facing predatory behavior that no child and no person really should have to deal with. Unless you have given your explicit affirmative consent in advance of the shoot, where you know exactly whether your nudity is expected, whether any kind of staged sexual touching is part of the job. There isn't a single model who I've spoken with who hadn't felt pressured.
I find that so absurd, given the sheer amount of time that people spend either looking at the advertisements that are created from this industry or looking at the content actually created by models themselves.
I think that there's probably something to the fact that it's a largely young female workforce. That might also account for why our concerns aren't taken quite so seriously. Recently, we announced the introduction of the Models Harassment Protection Act, which would be an amendment to the state's anti-discrimination laws and essentially afford models in New York protection against sexual and other forms of harassment in the workplace. We're working very hard to make sure that we have the same rights under the law as anyone else who's working in any other capacity.
And no matter where you work, anyone who's been sexually harassed can file a federal complaint at eeoc.gov.